Hi, I'm Alessandra Ruiz, and this is the longest lesson of my life. As a young girl, I wondered why I was considered different from everyone else. After watching West Side Story, I cried and asked my mom why someone would hate a Puerto Rican like me. This was the first time I learned about racism. And there I am, so innocent, not knowing it all. Apparently we were different. We weren't regular Americanos. What's the big deal? Why does it matter that I'm a little tanner than the other kids and I speak Spanish too? If I had only known, at least my brother and abuelo were there to comfort me. Growing up, my encounters with racism, like when I was minding my business at church when some gringa from my second grade class randomly came up to me and told me that we can't be friends because I'm Puerto Rican. Yeah. West Side Story in real life? Oh, no. Anyway, my encounters with racism occurred increasingly frequently. In high school, fellow students would pick on me because English was my second language and Spanish was my first. And if you don't speak English, you shouldn't be in advanced English classes. The best thing ever was when people would ask if my dad and his family swam to Florida from Cuba. It's like none of these kids knew what a freedom flight was. But that got me a lot of attention. In anthropology class in 10th grade, I started to appreciate the science of being human. The racism unit was what changed my life, honestly. We first discussed the pseudoscience which catapulted the ideas that blacks and other non-Caucasians are inferior to whites. Eurocentrism was my favorite thing to discuss because I loved letting those other kids know how wrong they were for looking at my curly hair, tan skin, and Puerto Rican accent like they're not wonderful. Like, what? The pseudoscience stuff was super interesting though, so let's get back to it. So, scientific racism? What? I mean, as it turns out, racism has scientific origins. This was the science of racial classification, a pseudoscience of the 18th century. As a disclaimer though, those so-called facts have all been disproven. German anthropologist Johann Blumenbach visited the Caucasus Mountains, where he became enamored with the small skull size of the inhabitants. He labeled these people as Caucasians and deemed them to have been created in God's image. This was the ideal form of humanity. He categorized 4 other human skull types as degenerate forms of God's creation both physically and morally, whatever that means. Africans, excluding the Africans, were categorized as Ethiopians and black. Non-Caucasian Asians had 2 separate categories. The yellow people were Mongolians of Japan and China, and Malayans were the brown race, including Aboriginal Australians and Pacific Islanders. Lastly, Native Americans were the red race. Just after hearing that, it really doesn't seem so scientific, am I right? I wish my 10th grade class had gone into depth enough, but at least the realization that incorrectly categorizing people is dehumanizing shut those kids up. Thank God. So, let's continue. A few more facts regarding racism, and scientific racism at that. Blumenbach's racial classification system was adopted by the United States in order to justify racial discrimination and slavery. Race science and evolutionary theories of these much simpler times pushed the idea that different races, separated by skin color, behaved differently. Oh, and there's more. They thought science could actually prove that. Craniometrics was one way to measure racial differences. This included the literal measurement of skull size to determine the intelligence of each racial group. The spread of Blumenbach's original idea led to 2 new, more general racial classification groups. The most primitive were black and brown races, and the most advanced were Caucasian or white races. So, of course, what did they do? They made themselves look superior, and they made everyone else look inferior. And they used bogus to back it up. So now that I've gone through basically the reasons why racism is an inaccurate prejudice, I want to leave you with this thought. Imagine you're a little Latina girl stuck between Florida during the year and Puerto Rico during the summer, coming to anthropology class in a high school full of racists. We're discussing stereotypes and racism. The children behind you are snickering and talking about you as each stereotype about Latinos is presented and debunked, even though they are debunked, disproven. You know they will never truly learn to put an end to their racist ways until racial classification is on the next lecture slide. We discuss how there is no actual basis for racism, ethnocentrism, or prejudice. Now those snickering kids are silent. Ah, satisfaction. Being a strong, proud minority. Am I right? Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Remember that all humans are the human race. The idea of race is a social concept and neither biologically nor anthropologically sound. Bye!